saw him as the Son of Man or the Son of God, and he bowed down to worship him. And this is where I want to start out with it, that not everybody is going to start in the same place when it comes to their faith. Like I said in discussions before, a lot of us were raised with Christian backgrounds. We were raised with a Christian family. We were raised with Christian parents, grandparents. That's not the story of everybody. Especially nowadays, with the younger generation growing up, there are all different types of backgrounds that people come from when they come to know the gospel of Christ. Some people, it's going to take a while. It's going to take years and years and years of the gospel and of that seed being planted and sown. And most of the time, there are these gradual steps that you see. And the blind man is no different, all right? There are some people you may know who were anything but faithful when they were younger, but they progressed in their faith. They made those steps towards Christ, and they're not the same person they were when years and years before. They're progressing in their faith and progressing in understanding of Christ. So just to remember that not everybody starts out with a Christian, going to church every Sunday, grandparents who read the Bible every day with have it on their nightstand kind of background. But everyone has to progress in their understanding. And even if we were raised with a Christian background, we have to progress in our understanding in a personal way, an individual way. You have to progress in your understanding of Christ, which means that we're going to have patience with people. You don't plant one of those very expensive pink seeds of seed corn or of sweet corn one day, and then the next day you have an ear of corn. It just doesn't work that way. It takes a long time of growing something in that direction in order for you to see fruit. And it's the same way when it comes to faith. Most of the time when it comes to you talking to people about Christ, it's not going to be a one-shot deal. There is a process of progression, if you will, of producing fruit. It's not just something that happens overnight. So the same thing is true when it comes to the blind man. The blind man had these stages of acknowledgement when it comes to Jesus. So let's look at the progression of these phases and these stages as we see defined in this text. And how the words that the blind man uses to describe Jesus reveals this increasing understanding. And even more and more, you see how the blind man is seeing Jesus as not just a man, not just a prophet, but he ends up seeing him as the Son of Man, the Son of God. He grew from an understanding of the most elementary thing and the most elementary belief that you can have when it comes to Jesus, to knowing that Jesus is the Christ. So the blind man's recognition of Jesus over the course of this back and forth conversation with the Pharisees supports the fact that the blind man was becoming a disciple of Jesus as he continued to recognize and understand the true nature of Jesus as the Son of God. In the end, the blind man is going to worship Jesus. He doesn't start out by worshiping Jesus. That's the end of the discussion when it comes to his acknowledgement of faith, that he is the Son of Man. He is the Son of God. So that's where it ends. But there's a process when it comes to this. There are a lot of steps that he walks before he gets to worshiping Jesus as the Son of God. So let's talk about these descriptions and how this blind man, or former blind man, describes Jesus. In chapter 9, verse 11, in response to the question, how were your eyes opened? By the nosy neighbors, if you remember us going over that particular passage. The neighbors asked him, how were you healed? What happened? And the former blind man answered. He says, the man called Jesus made mud and ordered my eyes and told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam. So I went and washed and received sight. Now, this is where the blind man begins his journey to worshiping Jesus. He's not there yet. By confessing that Jesus was the man who healed him, all right? Jesus was the source of the blessing of him having eyesight that he had not had. He didn't say that the mud was the source. He didn't say that anything else was the source or the pool of Siloam was the source. He said that Jesus was the source because the man Jesus gave him sight. So this man knew on a very personal level, by the way, because he had been born blind and had never seen anything, that Jesus was the one who was the miracle worker, all right? This blind man knew Jesus had power. So he takes a step in the direction of Jesus. This blind man understood that Jesus had miraculous power and he was a wonder worker. The Pharisees knew this as well. The Pharisees deny the fact that Jesus could work miracles. When we come to the raising of Lazarus from the dead in a couple of chapters in John chapter 11, after Lazarus has been in the tomb for days and behold, his body probably stinks, and in John 11 verse 47, after all that happens, after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, all these people go back to Jerusalem and report to the Pharisees what happened. And they debate over the question of what to do with Jesus. In John 11, verse 47, for this man does many miracles. Now, this is the Pharisees talking. This man does many miracles. So they know that Jesus is a miracle worker. They know that Jesus is a wonderfully powerful man. And those are the words of the Pharisees. Jesus does many miracles. So answer this question for me. Just because the Pharisees believed that Jesus could do miracles, did that mean that they were disciples of Jesus? Absolutely not. Now, they believed that Jesus could do miracles, but the Pharisees were not disciples of Jesus. So, this blind man is at the same place the Pharisees are. The Pharisees knew that Jesus was able to work miracles. This blind man knows that Jesus is able to work miracles because he's the one who had his sight restored. So the blind man believed that Jesus was a miracle-working man, but that is not where his understanding stopped. He kept progressing in how he acknowledged Jesus and how he described Jesus. To simply believe that Jesus is a miracle worker is not enough. We went over this a few months ago. There were a lot of people who believed that Jesus had wonder-working power and could perform miracles, but they did not follow him. They did not believe he was the Son of God. They believed he had miracle-working power, but they did not believe he was the Messiah. If you remember, the Pharisees could not deny the fact that a miracle had taken place. It was already witnessed by 2 or 3, or even more, that this was the man who was sitting at the temple who had been born blind. That had already been established as fact under 2 or 3 witnesses, right? So the fact is, Jesus healed the blind man. That was no longer the issue. The issue is, who is Jesus and by what authority does he do these things? So this blind man is starting out at a place where a lot of people start out. They believe that Jesus is powerful. They believe that Jesus is a wonder worker, a miracle worker. So you see the understanding of this man progress from verse 11 to verse 17. And his understanding and his boldness about Jesus grows from verse 11 to verse 17. The blind man is asked by this council of the Pharisees, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? Now, you see the progression here. First of all, he says, the man Jesus healed me. When the Pharisees asked the man who he thought Jesus was, what does he reply? It's not just that he's a man anymore. What's he reply? He's a prophet, okay? Now, to describe Jesus as a prophet goes beyond Jesus just being able to work miracles. You see the difference between those two? The first thing he says was, this man Jesus healed me. He had the power to heal me. And now he says in front of the Pharisees, this man is a prophet. Now, connect the dots. If you say someone is a prophet, who are they connected to? They're connected to God. If you say someone is a prophet, what are their words connected to? They're connected to God. So a prophet is someone who speaks on behalf of God. Now, you see how the blind man is edging closer and closer and acknowledging something closer and closer to what Jesus truly is? At first, he was a man who performed a miracle that no one else could do. He was supernaturally powerful, absolutely. Now he's standing before the Pharisees, and he gives a different answer that moves him closer to the point of worshiping Jesus. And that is that Jesus is a prophet. But a prophet is someone with a divine message from God for his people. Now that's interesting. Because how did the Pharisees respond? They are disciples of Moses. We don't know who in the world this man is. Remember that? So, they don't believe that Jesus is the one with the divine message. What this man is saying is that Jesus is divinely connected to God when it comes to his words, when it comes to what he's saying, when it comes to what he's speaking. Jeremiah, just to give you an example of a prophet, told of future events that were going to take place, absolutely. But he always had a present tense message for the people of God, and that was to repent, to come back to God, to smash your idols, to come back to the holy place. And if this blind man called Jesus a prophet, then this blind man is saying that Jesus is delivering a message from God, a message that is directly revealed from God to his people. The phrase used over and over again in the Old Testament when it comes to the occupation of a prophet is that the word of the Lord came to. You see, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came to Samuel in 2 Samuel 7 verse 4. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel in Ezekiel 3 verse 6. So this blind man sees Jesus as a representative of someone speaking the words of God. Now, you see the progression. From the first time that he describes Jesus, the man who healed me. Now, as he's in front of the Pharisees, he says, this man is a prophet. Answer this question. Do you worship prophets? He's not there yet. Do you worship prophets? Is there anybody in the entirety of the Old Testament who was a prophet who was worshipped? No. You don't worship prophets. You don't worship the messengers that God sends. You worship God. He's not there yet. They're just messengers. So there's a big difference between believing that someone is speaking the words of the Lord and believing that someone should be worshipped as God. That's a big difference. Now he's getting there. He's progressing to that point. He says at first, Jesus is a man who has the power to heal me. He is the one who gave me sight when it came to being blind, born blind, and now I see. He's the one who healed me. This man is also a prophet, all right? This is how he's progressing. But prophets weren't worshipped.
But as he come up, where did he come up with he's a prophet? Is that just on his own?
Yeah, they were asking him, who do you think he is? Because he's not to the point yet where he knows or believes that Jesus is the Son of Man.
He didn't hear that from somewhere else. He just came up with that himself.
I guess.
Okay.
And he's a very smart dude, as we've talked about. I mean, he is very well educated when it comes to Scripture. I think it was a couple weeks ago we talked about how he started out this essay where he goes, from the beginning of time, you have never seen someone who was born blind healed. So he basically does overall concepts or an overall search of the history of biblical stories and says, no one's ever been in the situation that I'm in of being healed from a blindness from birth. So he's a very smart guy.
Josh, he was in the tabernacle a lot too. He could have heard that.
Oh, yeah. And that's the other thing, because like we said, I think it was last week, week before, where he was sitting when he was begging for alms was along the road to the temple. Now, he might have been blind, but what did he still have? He had ears, and he could hear. And there were all kinds of activities. I wish we could go over all the activities that happened at the temple every single day, and it would amaze you. All the things that happened every single day at the temple when it came to worship, when it came to reading, when it came to prayer, all the things that happened during the temple. It wasn't that they just came together one time and that was it. It was that every single section of time during the day was filled with something going on at the temple. Some type of offering, some type of sacrifice. Morning and evening, we're going to talk about that Sunday actually. There was morning sacrifice, there was evening sacrifice, and everywhere in between there was always something that was happening in the temple. So this blind man had access when it came to his ears, hearing everything that was going on, especially when it comes to discussions that may have been going on close to him when it came to those who were talking about religious things. So you can see the advance that this blind man's faith is taking. He starts out, Jesus is a man who healed me. He's got wonder-working power. Then he's asked by the Pharisees, who do you think he is? He's a prophet. Now prophets are connected to God when it comes to their words. Jesus is speaking and being a spokesman of God. The Pharisees knew and experienced the same truths as this blind man, by the way. Jesus was an indisputable, miraculous force. There was no one who could deny that fact. There was no one else who could raise the dead. There was no one else who could heal like Jesus healed. There was no one else whose name was associated as much with wonder-working power as Jesus during this time. They could not deny the fact. Jesus also spoke and taught like no one else spoke or taught. Whenever they would try to trap him, he would always say something that was the truth and just obliterate everybody's in front of him. There was no one who was speaking like Jesus. So this blind man was stepping ever closer to a greater understanding of Jesus as he talks about Jesus, as he explains Jesus, as he thinks about Jesus, as he answers questions about what he believes about Jesus. His faith is growing louder and his faith is growing stronger as he stands before the Pharisees. Number 3, when they asked the blind man to explain what happened, again, in chapter 9, verse 27. This will be the 3rd time. And how his understanding of Jesus has grown is seen in his response. It might seem ironic and it might seem sarcastic, but what he asks is this: do you also want to become his disciples? And the way the sentence is structured, the word also or to, do you want to become his disciples too? The connection of that word seems to be that he is now describing himself as a disciple. That he sees Jesus as the one with the answers more than he sees the Pharisees. Now we know that this former blind man is not one to sugarcoat stuff. I mean, he is not one to mince words with the Pharisees. But amid all the very sarcastic, back and forth, he reveals that he sees Jesus as more than a miracle-working man and more than a prophet with a message from God, but that he is inching ever closer towards Jesus and being a disciple of his. He uses the word disciple. Now, the word disciple is where we get our English word for mathematics. And it describes someone who learns a discipline and by following someone else who has the answers or can attain the answers. All right? So, The Pharisees were disciples of Moses. That's what they said whenever you want to come as disciples too. They said, well, we're disciples of Moses. The Pharisees were disciples of Moses. And they claimed to know all the answers from Moses. So the Pharisees were following Moses, who they connected to the divine and the thundering mountain and the leadership of God's people, over decades of time in the Old Testament. This blind man started to see Jesus as having more answers than they do. As having more source of truth than they do. Because he said at the end of his whole essay, if this man is not from God, he cannot do these things. So Jesus even defined what a disciple was back in chapter 8, in John chapter 8, verse 31. He says, if you continue in my word, then you are my disciples. So the former blind man is growing in his understanding of Jesus. He's a miracle worker, absolutely. That Jesus is the man who healed him of his blindness from birth, 100%. But he is more than that. The blind man says he is a prophet. He is a spokesperson from God. He speaks the words of God. He is speaking on behalf of God, but there's more. And the blind man sees Jesus now as the source of the answers and the instruction more than anyone else, more than the Pharisees, more than what they say about Moses. Jesus is more. And you can see the steps that he takes. Ever closer and ever closer to worshiping Jesus as God. The blind man is inching ever closer to worshiping Jesus. Now, in chapter 9, verse 35, what happens to the blind man? He's had his back and forth with the Pharisees. The Pharisees get upset. What do? They cast him out of the synagogue. Now, as he's cast out of the synagogue, he is alone. Now, Jerusalem is a Jewish city, all right? Jerusalem is a city made up of Jewish homes, Jewish communities. And now this man has no community. He has no family. He is an outcast. And Jesus finds this outcast. That's the very interesting wording of Scripture. Jesus finds the outcast. That's an amazing sermon within itself. That Jesus finds the one who's been rejected, the one who's been neglected, the one who's on the fringes of polite society, the one who is cast out. Jesus finds. And as he's cast out of the synagogue and of the community of the Jews, he is cast out right into the arms of Jesus. And he is asked the all-important question. Jesus finds the former blind man, and he asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man? We talked about this last week in Acts chapter 8 and verse 37, where Philip and the chariot, they commanded to stand still. And the eunuch says, here's water, what hinders me from being baptized? And Philip says, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And he says, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jesus is asking this man, who has been defending Jesus as the man who healed him, the great and miracle-working Jesus who healed him, the prophet who has a message from God, who is directly connected to God, and his words are from God, okay? And now he sees himself as more of a disciple of Jesus than even of the Pharisees who are standing in front of him. So Jesus finds him and asks him a question. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Jesus himself describes him as the Son of Man more than any other description in the entire New Testament. We don't use that term as often as Jesus does. We refer to Jesus mostly as the Son of God. When Jesus spoke about himself, he referred more to his humanity than he did to his deity. There's a definite article in front of this, that he is the Son of Man, that he is the epitome and the fulfillment of everything according to the Messiah in the Old Testament. He is the Son of Man who is in the flesh. Stephen is the only one in the New Testament that uses this particular title to talk about Jesus when it comes to the gospel. Right before he dies, Stephen calls Jesus the Son of Man. Paul describes it like this, and I think this is the best definition biblically of what the Son of Man, the title, it really means. Because in Colossians 2 verse 9, Paul says this, that Jesus is the fullness of deity in bodily form. The fullness of deity in bodily form. So the answer to this question, this is very interesting because it seems like whenever the Pharisees asked this blind man a question, he was ready to answer it. It was like, I have an answer for you, and I'm going to wind up, and here you go. What's the interesting thing about when Jesus asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? What's he saying? I don't know who he is. As quick-witted and smart as this guy is, he did not know who the Son of Man was. He didn't know that Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ, God in the flesh, the Son of Man. But he was inching closer and closer. His eyes were opened by this miracle-working man. He knew that his words were not from earth. He knew that those words were connected to God. He knew that the message Jesus had was something that was beyond this world. He knew that when he looked at Jesus and he looked at the Pharisees, he wanted to follow Jesus more than he did the Pharisees. So in chapter 9, verse 36, when Jesus asks, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" he says, "And who is he, sir, that I might believe in him?" Now here's the incredible progression of the man's spiritual steps towards Jesus. He sees him as a miracle-working man, a prophet of God who has the message of God, someone who held the answers that should be followed when it came to being a disciple. And now the former blind man seeks the ultimate question, the answer to the ultimate question. Who is the Son of Man that I may believe in him? All these are necessary steps. That you believe that Jesus is powerful, you have to believe that. That you believe that Jesus is a miracle worker, you have to believe that. You have to believe that Jesus is a messenger from God. Jesus is a prophet. He gave more prophecies in the New Testament than anybody else. He is a prophet. He's a spokesman when it comes to God's word. He is the living incarnation of God. So when he spoke, they were the words of God. All these are necessary steps for you to be his disciple, for you to see him as a messenger of God, a prophet, someone who's connected when it comes to his words to God, to see all those wonder-working things. Those are absolutely necessary. But he's not there yet. In chapter 9, verse 37, Jesus says, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." Jesus now becomes more than the miracle worker. He becomes more than just the worker of wonders, more than just restoring sight to the blind, more than just a prophet with a message, more than the instructor and someone who's to be followed, more than simple belief. Because this former blind man comes to the edge of the cliff. And the precipice is there for him to either go off or to stay where he's at. Jesus restored his sight. Yes, he's a miracle worker. He did that. Jesus speaks as no one else has spoken. Jesus did that. Jesus answers and is the source of all truth. He is that. The blind man's awareness has come full circle and full measure about who Jesus is. And now the blind man sees that he is speaking to the very Son of Man, the divine in the flesh. This is Christ sent from heaven. And I want you to notice what happens. Chapter 9, verse 38. He says, "Lord, I believe." And what's he do? What does he do? He worships him. This blind man has been cast out of the worship of the Jews. This is the irony of the passage. He's been cast out of the worship of the Jews. He's been cast out of the synagogue, where they worship God. And as he's been cast out, he begins to worship Jesus, and his worship is acceptable. Jesus receives his worship. You don't worship a miracle worker. You don't worship a prophet. You don't worship a teacher or an instructor. Who do you worship? You worship God. If you're a Jew, ask yourself this question. This man was a Jew. If you were a Jew, who do you worship? Do you worship someone who performs miracles? No. Do you worship someone who is a prophet? No. Do you worship someone who is an instructor or a teacher? No. They didn't worship any of them. Who do you worship? You worship God. Who did this man see Jesus as? There's only one who you worship, and that's who? He saw Jesus as God. This man progressively made steps to the point where he worshiped Jesus as the Son of God. You don't worship a miracle worker. You don't worship a prophet. You don't worship an instructor. You worship God. Now, we don't know how he worshiped. We know the word worship is used when it comes to this, and that word means that you fall to the ground with your forehead touching the earth in front of whoever it is that you are worshiping. That's how you worship. You bend the knee, you bow down. No one was worshipped by the Jews but God. Not even the Pharisees thought themselves worthy of worship, even though they may have thought they deserved more praise than anybody else. They did not think themselves worthy of worship. That was reserved only for God. So this blind man sees Jesus as God and worships. This blind man progresses in his knowledge. He increases his understanding of Jesus. He steps closer and closer to the truth until he sees and understands and knows and hears the true nature of Jesus Christ that was revealed to him by Jesus himself. And that belief leads him to worship Jesus as God. This is a text that explains to you the progression of faith in this former blind man. The progression that a lot of people have not come to. They're stuck somewhere in the middle of all this, and they do not worship Jesus as God. They believe he's a miracle worker. They believe that his message is fun, it's good. They believe he's an instructor, a teacher. But to bow down before him as God, some people get hung up on that. So, that's what the text tells us. I'm going to ask you what you've learned from that. But once again, next week we're going to be discussing leadership principles when it comes to looking at the Pharisees and Jesus. So, I'll give you the rest of the time. So what do you learn? What sticks out? Comments? Commentary?
Thinking about the blind man, we're saying that with him being blind, that it probably heightened his ability to hear things.
Maybe?
So he heard the word of God, he understood those. But being on that path to the temple, he probably heard conversations from those Pharisees as they come in with. And he knew their heart.
Oh, yeah.
Things about them that he heard also.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was in prime real estate for hearing a lot of conversations. Oh, man. Jerry's on the ball. Oh, man, it's going to be a long 5 minutes. Yeah.
But there were also multiple witnesses to Jesus' miracles and everything else. Could not accept that.
Well, like the conversation turned. If you remember the one, I forget where it's at, where they asked about what power do you do these things. So the conversation shifted from Jesus is able to do miracles. Well, we can't really do anything about that. To let's discredit the power by which he does miracles. Does that make sense? Like you do miracles by the power of Beelzebub. You know, like it's almost like they dismiss the miracle altogether so that they can insert the explanation as something that is of greater authority. So I don't know how you dismiss a miracle. I mean, how do you explain away Jesus raising someone from the dead who'd been in there for 4 days? How do you explain that away? Well, you can't explain away the miracle, so you might as well try to say, well, you've done this by the power of the devil. Well, why does the devil want to raise somebody from the dead? Yeah, when does he have that kind of power anyway? That's right. I mean, to me, it does the explanation of things, just like when this blind man heard the explanation of the Pharisees, it didn't make any sense to him. Why, when they even changed their discussion and say Jesus is doing this by the power of the devil, why would the devil want to help people? Why would he want to heal somebody? You know, why would he want to cast out somebody or a demon from someone who he had already possessed when it came to that? Why would he want to do those things? It doesn't make any sense. Just like this blind man, when he was standing before them, said, "It's very interesting to me that you say that you don't know where this man is from. Yet he healed me of my blindness." So what's that tell you? You know, it's kind of like you are trying to explain something away that you can't explain away. The only way you can explain it is this man is from God, and that's it. So, yeah, there was a lot of stuff like that. And it shows you even more how much of a power grab it was for the Pharisees, because they wanted to hold on to that. And they wanted to stay in the spotlight. And they wanted to have control over the people to explain to them the law as they knew it. And when Jesus comes along and changes all that, they try everything in the book to trap him, to discredit him, to say all kinds of things against him. They just can't. Anybody from the back?
What kind of time frame did this man progress? I mean, how long did it take him? Do you have any idea?
Oh, I don't know.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't seem like it's that long.
It doesn't. It seems really quick.
Yeah. But I guess the thing that puzzles me is that he had no idea who the Son of Man was. Like, he had no idea. It was almost like that was a.
You mean prior to being made before he could see?
No, what he says is, I don't know who he is.
Oh, okay.
But he knew that miracles come from God.
Yeah, he knew that miracles came from God, and that was the only. But I don't know if that was not a topic of conversation when it came to the Jews, if that wasn't a title that was used when it came to the prophecy. I don't know. But,
We also know that there was a lot of talk, a lot of discussion, a lot of rumors about Jesus at the temple, at the synagogue, throughout all of Jerusalem at that time.
oh yeah.
This, this wasn't the first time somebody got seen doing a miracle. He had been seen.
Yeah.
We know that the Pharisees they were understanding for like this.
All right, next Tuesday, we will be discussing the leadership principles from this text. So, and then we'll go on to chapter 10, which is fun, chapter 2.